Hey everyone, today I am talking about why we are being forced to overconsume and how the whole world is set up to encourage it. I want to preface this by saying, although it is a global issue and it's something that's being pushed upon us, I do feel like there is a responsibility for each of us to do our own part in our own research and try to rectify this problem. Looking at even just the background, this is from everything I acquired in the past few months. I still have a long way to go, but I just have been on like a deep dive these past few days, and I wanted to share my thoughts, my findings, and some resources for you guys. I wanted to start with the history of why we are so drawn to overconsumption, to buying, like why it's at the forefront of so much of our world, and you really can trace it back in history. I would recommend watching this video. I'll put a photo of it here, but it's titled Consumerism is the Perfection of Slavery, and it's wonderful. It's amazing. It's very eye-opening. And I also want to shout out my previous video or previous update for my 2-month no-buy. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm on a year-long no-buy, so if that's of interest to you, feel free to subscribe, follow along. But someone told me to think about the economy and who I'm supporting when I'm purchasing, and I am very outspoken about the fact that I hate Trump, and that was just like such a slap in the face and a good eye-opener. Prompted this deep dive. So okay, back to consumerism is the perfection of slavery. So his main point is showing the change from society being formed for workers, and in that day and age, workers were promised a steady job and in return a steady income, and eventually things changed, and this is major paraphrasing, so I truly recommend watching the video, but society then changed to be formed around consumers as the organizing unit. And he goes on to explain how this encourages competition within each other, and especially given the presence of social media, he highlights how that further encourages competition. He says consumerism creates a competition in society for prestige, and really it just highlights a cycle of you work to earn money to buy things, to work more to earn money to buy more things. And I said this when I was talking about decluttering and in a different video, but when I look around my room, it's crazy to me that all these things used to be money, and all that money used to be was from work. It's so eye-opening when you really think about it that way. And his whole point is that we're now slaves to the system because we only work to buy more, which means that we have to work more, and we have a constant craving, an endless cycle, and an endless hole that's never being fulfilled, which is exactly what they are hoping for. He also says we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't even like. And someone commented, one of the top comments is, the best way to keep a prisoner from escaping is to make sure he never knows he's in prison, which is, I can not say his name, but it's the author of Crime and Punishment wrote that. I mean, it all rings true. And also I want to say that like I am the prime example of falling into this. All my money that I've amassed up until this year, I have spent on things, and they're all, like, for the most part, so much of it is meaningless to me. Not many of these things were needed, and very few of them spark a lot of joy. I also was researching on Substack because I feel like people have a lot of interesting opinions there, and I will link all of the articles I'm talking about. In one of the articles referenced a retail analyst named Victor Lebeau from 1955 who wrote the following: our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfactions, our ego satisfactions in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever-increasing pace. And that was in 1955. So I can assume it's just gone like this ever since. And I'll get into this, but I fear it's gonna continue that way. And what really struck me about that quote was the use of the word rituals. because I think so often now people disguise consumption and overconsumption as like self-help, like a 20-step skincare routine or 20-step bedtime routine, and so much of it is just product placement and ads and very little to do with an actual routine or a ritual for oneself. There was also an article from The Guardian called Chip Caldwell called "Too Much Stuff, Can We Solve Our Addiction to Consumerism?" He put into words beautifully, "Consumerism has become a symbol of liberty and democratic equality. In today's world, the idea goes, anyone can consume anything and thus be turned into the person they want to be. The symbolic glow of consumption cannot simply be turned off." And this goes back to becoming a slave to society, because it's not that those who can't afford something can just no longer buy it. You can buy it and then you're just forever indebted. And so many people who have fallen into like shopping addictions amass so much debt that they feel they're stuck in this cycle forever, and oftentimes they are, because it's so hard to get out of intentionally. And people are disguising consumption in so many different ways. Like, people disguise their hobbies or their overconsumption as a hobby, which is, I feel like, what a lot of people who are obsessed with clothing do. Like, they attribute it to being like their personal style and their method of expression, which is totally fair and true to a point, but there's a point, and I feel like it often crosses that. Exactly what I did with makeup. I felt like it was a hobby, but the hobby became less about the art of makeup and the art of creating and more about buying. That was the hobby. And when the hobby turns into shopping being the focal point, it's no longer a hobby and you're just consuming. Another thing is that minimalism can also be a form of consumption, because people no longer, I feel like there's different types of minimalists. Like, there's genuine minimalists who just strip back what they have, and then there's people who use it as an excuse to curate an entirely new home, an entirely new aesthetic, say to buy quality pieces, and they shun anyone who's buying something on the cheaper end because they might have to replace it. But that goes into what someone else is saying, which I'll bring up in a second. But minimalism and purchasing quality over quantity, or purchasing what do people say? What is the saying? Buy it once, buy it cheap, buy it, what the fuck is that saying? Buy it expensive, buy it once, buy nice, or buy twice. Is that what it's called? Okay, whatever. That's not an option for a lot of people. So it's inherently classist, like a lot of minimalist aesthetics or minimalist videos, because they're expecting you to buy very expensive pieces right off the bat, which, unless you have massive amounts of disposable income, is not fathomable, or unless you want to go into debt. There's another article that I disagree with a lot of parts of this article, but it's from the Financial Diet, and it's called "Minimalism, Just Another Boring Product Wealthy People Can Buy," which is quite funny. And the author is Chelsea Fagan. Writes that it is classist, a fad for the rich, referring to minimalism, because people in real poverty don't have to worry about what not to buy, and because of how expensive sustainable and heirloom items often are. Stop wasting money on all that IKEA nonsense, Fagan imagined a minimalist saying. With this $4,000 dining table hand-whittled by a failed novelist in Scandinavia, you will never need another piece of furniture. Which really just points to having enough disposable income to invest in your wardrobe and surroundings. Furthermore, she decides the idea that a simple aesthetic and decluttering equals moral worth of faux spiritualism, which is kind of going back to what I was saying, like the fake ritual. It often, minimalism is an extreme, but I feel like people often do view it as like someone who's more zen, who's more spiritually in tune, who has the money for aesthetic quality pieces. And it's just so interesting that people are over consuming and then turning to minimalism, which can often be just another form of consumption. I think it's striking the balance, because I do think that putting a lot of time into thinking about what would be the perfect item for you can be helpful. Like, if you want to watch a lot of reviews and look and feel the product or feel the texture of the clothes or wear the lipstick or whatever it may be. But then once you have it, becoming happy with it and not then immediately seeking like, was that the best thing? I don't know if that point made sense, but okay, part 2 is why we've talked about like why society is being pushed into consumption, but I wanted to go into like the individual and why each person feels such a draw to consume in different ways. And a big part of it is items have become a part of one's personality, and I want to show a lot of examples on the screen right now. But when you become a part of a niche collectors group, people are so disconnected and seeking so much community that a lot of these groups of collectors can form some semblance of community online. And I think that's a big part of it, is like having a status symbol of, oh, I wear this thing, I collect this thing, you do too, in hopes of making a connection through this item. It's also just, I think, a general lack of hobbies and connection with one's surroundings, and people are now turning to items for personality. I want to do a whole separate video on like the fantasy self and how marketing has made people think that an item will change their personality and how it's pushing people to buy specific things. But that's for a later time. But okay, so here are some examples of what I was just referring to and collecting things for personality. So I also want to highlight that I was and am struggling to not be one of these people. With makeup, you could easily include me in this slide, so I don't judge anyone who has done any of this. I just think it's important to understand maybe why you are doing these things. Okay, and I also think that it's easy to look at it from an outside perspective if it's a niche that makes no sense to you. Like I've talked about this before, collecting water bottles or Labubus or things like that. It doesn't make any sense to me, but people who are collecting that probably doesn't make any sense why I have 100 lip glosses. So there's no judgment, I just want to show. Okay, so Labubus, I feel like this is such a cultural phenomenon that makes no sense to me, but people really have connected over these things. I find them creepy, but I know they have a fan base. Okay, this next one is skincare, and I think this photo especially was interesting to me because of the way that it's organized. I think people think of hoarders as clutter, like houses with clutter, but to me this is still hoarding, and as long as it's organized, I think people start thinking of it as aesthetic collecting, and the difference is really non-existent. The next is a creator I do really like named Abby on TikTok, and she talks about the reality of makeup overconsumption. So this looks a lot like my collection. You can imagine this. Next up, this one makes no sense to me, but I know there's a large collection of people who love Disney. So this is someone's favorite pieces in their Disney collection. And Disney is actually a great way to think of this because Disney is all about fantasy and escape and escapism, and purchasing these things is a way to push that detachment from whatever life you might be living, and people really grip onto that, and it's so sad how marketing does that. The next one is so niche, but this is someone who collects toothpaste, I guess, and puts it all over her wall. So this is another example to me of organization and aesthetic making people think that it's not hoarding. This is someone's tableware collection. And then this one is just a good example of, I feel like, modern day. Someone says, I love stuff, and shows their collection, and it says collector of things. And I think that since they're expensive perfumes and they're classic novels, and she goes on to show like expensive curated items or a curated aesthetic, People don't see it as a problem, but being a lover of stuff is what we've been conditioned to be. The next one is a body hygiene collection, I guess. Perfume, which perfume has also never made sense to me as I look at like 20 perfumes in front of me. But I feel like once you find a scent, I have a really strong sense of smell, and I love when someone I know smells the same way, because then when I smell it out and about, it like reminds me of them. So it's never made sense to me if you find a scent that works for you. And then this one is someone's Stanley collection, and the caption is, "I need more shelves." So I mean, I think it's very clear what the problem is there, and it's so interesting to unpack like why we've been pushed into this. And again, I don't think it's our fault that we have come here, but I do think once you realize it, and it is your responsibility to open your own eyes to the problem, it's your responsibility to then make changes. And for me, that doesn't look like never buying things again, but it does look like spending more time between the idea of wanting something and the actual decision to purchase it. An article I read talked about how time itself feels like it's compressing, and a big part of that is because the time between wanting something and receiving it is so instant these days. When you want a dopamine hit, you can just scroll your phone, and they are targeting us chemically as well, like never before. There is an article titled "The Neuroscience of Overconsumption: Why More is Most Often Not Better." It's on Substack, and it just explains what you probably already know, but the dopamine surge that happens when you purchase something. And they explain it as, shopping is a perfect example of this. Buying a new outfit stimulates our brain's reward system. Novelty itself triggers dopamine release, so the brain is wired to seek out new experiences and new things. I think in modern times, people are less likely to seek out new experiences because new things are so accessible. This is why a fresh outfit, continuing the quote now. This is why a fresh outfit, a new gadget, or even browsing online stores can feel so satisfying even if we don't need what we're buying. Over time, the same behavior produces less satisfaction, creating a cycle of seeking more to get the same feeling of reward, which is exactly what happens with drug addiction, which is what this is. It's a drug addiction, like a chemical addiction to the release of dopamine. And someone on Reddit also was, sharing what it felt like for them in a shopping addiction tab. They said, "You're not addicted to shopping, you're addicted to becoming someone else for 5 minutes. Let's be real, nobody buys clothes because they need them. You buy because for a second you feel different, more confident, more interesting, more in control. Then it fades, so you buy again and again and again. Same cycle, different outfit." People talk about drug addiction like it's a separate thing, but what's the difference? You feel empty, you consume, you feel better, it disappears, you repeat. And what this is missing is that you need more the next time. And so it's never ending, and what you need more of is the gap between the last thing you bought and the next thing is decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. This is only going to increase. There's no signs of slowing down or stopping, and it's very scary. The article I was reading was talking about how we're in an acceleration era. They said essentially the job of all technology is to compress time. They later on said, "On the grand scale, we're all about to embark on the same experiment, and not necessarily by choice. As a species, we're hitting the fast forward button. Our religion has become speed, and our God is immediate outcomes." And those are all the quotes, so I'm gonna end that there. But it's so true. Like, I didn't realize how often I seek a hit of dopamine. I wake up and I want to go on TikTok. I can't be alone with my own thoughts because it's so unnatural. I have to push myself to eat a meal without stimulation, external stimulation. All of those things are the same reason why I had such problems with shopping, because it was such an easy way to get a hit of dopamine. The effects are far more than just economical. Like, the environmental impact of shopping is astronomical. And
guys, I forgot to film an outro. I'm so sorry. I just got my wisdom teeth removed earlier this morning and it hurts quite a lot to talk, so I don't think I'm gonna film anything other than this, but I will continue my thoughts probably in a different video at a different point. But I hope you enjoyed. Love you.